What if I told you the first time I trusted my gut was as a freshman in high school in the middle of a Sephora? Welcome to the Trust Your Gut podcast. You know, we live in a world that runs on mostly logic and reason, but I'm here to provide you a roadmap to life using the most ancient and arguably underrated form of wisdom, your gut. This podcast explores all you need to know on how to harness your own intuition through life's highs and inevitable lows. From relationships to parenting, to wealth management and career shifts, I'll walk alongside you to better understand how to lean into your own intuition for guidance and support. My name is Dr. Alaina Puff, school psychologist turned intuitive coach, and I'll be guiding you through this adventure as I share my personal and professional experiences on how I learned to tap into my own intuition and how this changed my life forever. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Trust Your Gut podcast. My name is Dr. Alaina Puff, and I am just so happy to have you here today. Today, I am joined by a very special guest and friend who I am so excited to have on the podcast here today. Today, I am so excited to introduce my dear friend, Natalie Orozco-Moxley, the founder and owner of Sunday Mournings. She is an amazing woman who I was actually able to meet about, maybe a few months ago. And she's here to share her story and talk more about her company, which is called Sunday Mournings. So a little bit about Natalie. Sunday Mournings is a beautiful organization that allows Natalie to share her grief story that started at the age of 15 when she lost her mother, but it really started when she was around the age of 4 when she lost her father to addiction. Carrying the loss of her entire family all the way up through the age of 23. Natalie feels her purpose is to change cultural messaging surrounding our grief-avoidant culture through her own therapy, somatic practices and rituals, and time working with Hospice of the Valley. That's what really blossomed Sunday Mournings. Sunday Mournings' mission is to support authentic connections and conversations through heartfelt gift giving that supports the mind, body, and soul. Sunday Mournings is the home for love and loss, a place that breathes life into pain and reminds love of its home. How absolutely beautiful. Natalie, thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. It just brought me back to when we first met. I remember it was around like December. And so it was an accidental meetup. I sort of crashed your party with one of our mutual friends. And I just remember thinking like, wow, this is someone who really gets it. And it was in a weird spot in my life, a lot of transitions that I know we're going to sort of tap into. But I just remember thinking like, I'm so appreciative of your warmth and how seen I felt with you from the moment that I saw you. So thank you for having me here. It's like the greatest gift and honor, and I can't wait to dive into all things today with you.
Wonderful. Yes. Thinking back to that time, you were in a season of we both were honestly in a season of major transition. And even thinking back to that was only a few months ago. I don't know about you, but that feels like a lifetime ago.
Yes. Yeah, definitely a lot of like rebirth, re-identity, re-understanding who I am and remembering what's important to me. So I'm with you. That's almost like I've loved that you get to see all these different versions of also each other really through this whole process. Yeah,
Yes.
it's been fun, and I'm just so grateful to be here.
Yeah. So kind of getting into things, I really am hoping to learn a little bit more about you today and to kind of learn more about Sunday Mournings and share that with our community, because I think the point that really stood out to me when you first described your business to me was the fact that it's centered around grief and loss, which like is it plainly stated, it's not a sexy thing to structure your business around.
But Alina, I try to make it sexy, okay? I'm just kidding.
No, you do a beautiful job, but it's a topic that is often taboo and kind of avoided, as you had mentioned in your bio, in our society. And I was just so touched at how you took something that a lot of people, again, just kind of evade in conversation and really made it approachable and from a place of empowerment. So I was wondering if you could begin by sharing a little bit about your personal journey that kind of led you to this moment in time in creating Sunday Mournings.
Totally. And yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there's a lot out there, but I think what's always sort of been disheartening for me is how much misinformation there is. But also, when you're looking for things, you have to search for it a little bit harder than I think you do the typical topics. I mean, if you even sit there and think about boundaries, quick type into Instagram, you're going to find 500 different Instagram accounts or books that you can read. I think grief is something that we're just really starting to even recognize, let alone even talk about. And so, with Sunday Mournings, it really started back to that journey for when I was trying to find the resources. I think, as you stated so well in my bio, as I say that it started when I was 15. But if I'm really honest, it started when I was much younger, of what grieving of not having a parent looked like, having and struggling with someone that had addiction issues. And, especially being so young, there's a lot of fear of abandonment and so many things that I didn't realize were really manifesting in my body from like a very young age. So with Sunday Mournings, I just sat and was thinking, okay, how can I make this approachable? How can I make this real? And how can I make this me at the end of the day too? It's not about me, but I feel like it's very important that it is in a lot of ways that is that approachable, warm place that you can find the resources. So even just starting back to like Sunday Mournings, which is Mourning, it is the idea of in the weekends are really when I felt the most alone. I think it went back to when brunch was becoming really popular, and even sort of like the memes of Sunday scaries of like, okay, everything has to be resolved by Monday. But being 15, I felt very stuck in the middle of not knowing where I fit in. It was like with the elders that were in sort of grief support groups that I was in, they'd always tell me, "You're so young, don't worry, like you have the rest of your life ahead of you, like we know this is hard," and sort of bypassed a lot of what I was going through. And then people my age were worried about prom. They were worried about what car they were going to get. They were worried about, the high school football team and what person they were dating. And so I just felt very like I don't know where I fit in. And so the goal with Sunday Mournings was to be a place that you could fit in, no matter where you were in the process, whether it's day 1 or day, 70 or years into your grief journey. And what I really, really love about gift giving, it's always been one of my favorite ways to allow people to like really feel seen. And I think, oftentimes it's not even necessarily about the monetary value. It's about the little listenings that you do along people's stories and across people's journeys to be able to have them understand like, oh, this person really was listening when I was sharing that about my loved one or my person had passed or this transition that I'm going through. And so I really thought like, looking back at my story, the losses sort of happened into losing my whole family by the age of 23. It was like this revolving door of flowers and a lot of times really empty promises of showing up. And
Yeah.
I say that, not lightly and not in a way to shame people that were in my life or still are in my life during that time, but it just, we don't know what to do. And so in between, we just don't say anything. And the silence really became deafening for me. It's like, I don't know where to fit in at school. I don't know where to fit in these, even the grief groups that I'm going to. But what I really wanted to learn is like, well, what do people need? How can I have people bridge that gap of starting that conversation? And rather than giving flowers, that, sort of my motto and main purpose behind Sunday Mournings is that flowers just die. And it's another thing to think of and take care of versus, oh, I can give this beautiful box that has gifts in it that are very, focused on ritual, focused on the after, focused not just on the immediate, but like years into this process that they can keep the box and fill it with memories and other cards or gifts that really help them see that light along the way. And so, yeah, with Sunday Mournings, that's one of the main goals is to show up in the days that I feel also are super important. So like the grief dates, death anniversaries, not the
Mhm.
immediate when a lot of people show up, which is in the first month or so, but what happens 3 months in, what happens 6 months in, what happens a year when we're circling back to those dates too. So, yeah, and that's how Sunday Mourning was blossomed to be what it is just really hoping to support small businesses along the way and hoping to bridge that gap for people that want to show up, but they're like, hey, this is really awkward and I don't really know what I'm doing. So I'd love some resources that are actually like approachable and not filled with like platitudes of like, oh yeah, just show up and let them know that time will heal all wounds and whatnot as well too. So yeah, that's
How
where it came to
beautiful.
be.
How lovely. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing. I really appreciate how you share about how these events that have happened to you, these losses that have happened to you, how you've been able to take that energy and transmute it into something really beautiful to give back to the world. And that those are the kind of people that I want to have on this podcast. Those are the kind of people that I want to be in connection with, because I think I too share that sentiment in my own work. And when you were talking about kind of the taboo around grief and loss and how that's viewed in our society, it reminds me a lot of my own experiences, even with mental health, right? Like when we
Totally.
talk about it, and granted, I will say, like, we are making a movement, and especially in younger generations, to be more open and candid about it, but there's still a lot of stigma that exists there. And so when you were sharing about being a teenager and even into young adulthood, what I heard you say was that you were really toggling between these two worlds. You were this bridge that was, with these grief support resources for adults, but then still very much wanting to be a teenage girl. So I'm wondering if you could
Hmm.
kind of elaborate, because I know there's people out there who are either in that situation as late adolescent young adults, or even parents of teenagers who might be going through some sort of grief and loss. Can you speak a little bit more about the toggling between that and maybe what you would tell your younger self knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, even that question already has me in like all of my feels because I think there is so much I would tell her. And I think one of the main things that I would tell parents really is just to be so gentle. I think 15 is already such a formative age. There's so much happening in the body, in the mind, in relationships, in life as well too. But I think mainly what I would tell myself is like at the end, you'll find your way and you'll find your people, and that it won't necessarily be easy because I think I kept looking for like the quick fix or the avoidment and working a lot. That was one of my main like coping mechanisms. Like you said, especially with mental health, I could feel myself declining, but for me, that just meant push harder. I've worked 3 jobs since I was 16. And I think that has been one of my biggest things that I had to understand was like perfectionism. So I think with parents as well too, is like knowing that's one of my biggest passions is there aren't that many resources out there. And in my time working with Hospice of the Valley, I worked with children ages from 4 all the way up to about 14. And so I've seen a lot of how it shapes families and just understanding of taking it day at a time, but also not pretending that these things don't exist. I think that's something that was really challenging for me, speaking from my own personal family, is I felt this need to protect everyone. I felt this need of like,
Mm.
oh, if I'm going to bring this up, then, my aunt is going to start crying and I don't want her to have to experience that. So I'm just not going to say anything. So really starting to have those like honest, table time conversations where we understand that expressing emotions is okay, and also seeking professional help when that's needed too, and not knowing that that's like a weakness or that there's anything wrong with you. I think where I finally got the permission to feel a lot of those things was in a professional environment where I had that neutral, loving person that was mirroring back to me things that were happening. Because I think regardless how much you want to say it, especially as a parent, you just want them to feel so loved and supported. It really is sometimes just a neutral person or someone else that they need to hear it from too. And that's not very easy to understand or sit with too. So yeah, there's so many things I would tell her, but I think the main thing is just, I think for a lot of my life, it became my identity. I think in school, it was like, oh, that's the girl who's like, mom died. Like, be cautious when you're, around her, be careful what you say. But instead, it's like now I just learned how to weave it into my life versus have it be my identity as well, too. So just telling her, like, it's okay to still want to exist and be young and have fun. And joy doesn't have to feel scary just because it starts to feel foreign.
That's so powerful. And really speaking to the duality of emotions that, as we move through life, the universal experiences that we are going to encounter different emotional states simultaneously, right? You can experience immense
Yeah.
joy and immense loss. And I think that's something that's all over your branding and something that I feel like really is resonant with you.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's like I would feel really guilty. I think specifically speaking for my mom and my relationship, it's probably the loss I speak of most, just because my mom is still like, considered to be my guiding light and like my best friend. but I wanted to make her life worth it. I feel like her life got cut so short and she had been through so much that it's like I honestly almost became hyper obsessed with making her life worth it versus making like my life worth something. And so I always sort of state is like it can be the duality of both, is like learning how to coexist within finding that joy for myself again, but also still feeling that grief of wishing that she was here to witness it too. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is one of my key, like, North Stars really is that constant reminder. It doesn't necessarily get easier. You just sort of learn how to integrate that and remind yourself for the things that show up and the dates that show up or times, like even launching this business. It's like, I so wish that she was here to see like this little girl who was shy that wouldn't, I was so shy. Like I would not speak
I
to
don't believe it.
anyone.
I
I
don't
was
believe
so
that.
introverted. I know it's when I became, fun fact, I was a hairdresser for a little bit in my life, but that really taught me how to connect with people. And you're sitting with someone for a few hours at a time. It's sort of awkward if you aren't learning how to have those connections. And so, yeah, I think really just diving back to like not minimizing how I feel, because I also wish that my family was here to see it too.
Wow. That is so powerful. And I appreciate you bringing up being a hairdresser because I see those memes online. Do you want it with the therapy service or without the therapy service? But I believe that like being in those
Yeah.
chairs is a form of connection, and that is something
Yes.
that is the cornerstone of my practice, is really going back to not only connection, but really guiding us back to our intuition. So our internal knowing, excuse me, our our this internal sense of understanding who we are and connecting to our bodies. And so just from my own experience personally and professionally, when you go through stages and series of grief or loss in your life, and as these waves kind of move through of emotion, it's very easy to become disconnected. And you've even alluded to that, kind of reflecting on your own experience. So I was wondering if maybe you could share what the relationship with your intuitive knowing has really looked like and evolved into over the past several years as you've grown.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that, because I think it's something that's not necessarily talked about within, but to me they can't exist without each other. I think especially within intuition and sort of getting higher connected higher to whether, it's your spiritual nature or just like your loved ones that have passed. I think it's something that continues to grow as time goes on. I will completely own and say I think this year is probably the first time I've ever actually understood what connecting to my body feels like. I think I've thought that I've understood what that feels like, but I think that it really is this year. And I say that for so many reasons, because I would self abandon so much. And I didn't even realize that. I think people pleasing is like a hot topic right now. And it's like almost sort of, I don't want to say like champion, but it's like, oh yeah, I'm like a recovering people pleaser. It's just like something you sort of say. But I think for me, it was like I was always so concerned about keeping the peace just because of my childhood and my upbringing of being that glue, that I would self abandon. I wouldn't even know if I felt hungry a lot of the times. It's like
Mm.
I would tell myself, oh, it's not important. We're just going to get through this, like push through this, third shift of the job, versus like, how do I really check in with myself? And what is that? What does that even feel like? What do these things feel like? How do I know that this is my intuition? We're talking about hunger, but in other forms too, of like, how do I know it's my intuition? And I think that's a question I've sat with a lot, is like, is it actual intuition, or is it just something that I'm wanting to have happen? Or there's so many, beautiful examples of that. But for me, it was really understanding that like mind body connection and feeling safe enough to feel it. And I think that's another thing that can sort of prolong that experience, is rather than asking the tough questions, we're asking the like sort of tough questions where we know ourselves enough to know we can like navigate the answer, versus like really, really sitting and asking yourself that. So I think one of the most helpful tools for me has been like asking myself questions, or having others ask questions for me has been helpful in tapping into that intuition. And even sitting there and thinking of like, I was so intimidated by yoga. I hated it. You would like all of my friends, a lot of them are yoga instructors. And I know that that's so really preached, especially when connecting to mind, body. And a lot of times I feel like in grief, the grief world is like going for a walk or going to yoga. But I realized for so much of what was happening for me with yoga is that it was activating things in my body where a lot of that
Mm.
trauma was stored. And I didn't understand where all of a sudden I would feel really emotional after a yoga class, but I couldn't really put my finger on what was happening. And so I think that's another practice of even just, honestly, physical activation of understanding like, okay, this is where different places I know in my body where I feel that tension that maybe even I was so numb to even feeling it before I didn't know it existed. So I think there's, so many different avenues that have been supportive for me. But I think first and foremost is like getting really still and understanding that it's going to be okay. And I trust myself to make it out of the stillness. When previously I can say I didn't trust myself. I've been through really, really dark times and really long times that I struggled with my mental health that I absolutely did not trust that I could make it independently on my own without, professional help or friends, where now it's like, yeah, I can sit with that and know that I have the tools to make it out the other side, but still sit with it in order to feel it and connect with that intuition. So,
Mm. You are speaking all my language, my dear. I mean, from like in the mind body connection to begin with to embracing the stillness, which is so uncomfortable for the gross majority of us, to allowing yourself to trust yourself that you'll hold through that stillness. I mean, how
yeah.
powerful and how courageous to give yourself permission to do that. I just like am in complete awe because I feel like that is something that most people don't have the capacity or don't think they have the capacity rather to actually achieve. And it's just, one of the things that you shared was that, this dedication to work and that distraction of work and that go, go,
Mhm.
go and that survival and that like on the hamster wheel of life kind of thing to busy or occupy yourself is a coping mechanism that we've all employed at one point or another. I know I certainly have. And I'm wondering what prompted this change to say, I can't keep going like this. Um, in previous podcasts, I've referred to this for me as a full send moment where you like, you're
Mhm.
at the end of the rope. You're like, I can't keep doing this. Like something's got to give. Could you share a little bit of what that moment looked like for you or that timeline?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had little pockets of that along the way, but again, bringing it back to intuition, I didn't want to listen. I was like, no,
Mhm.
like we've been through this before, like we're strong. Why would this be any different? Like why would the outcome of this be any different? And I think one thing that's like a mantra for me that I've really sat with a lot is like for me, actually chaos is very easy and peace takes practice for me. I'm so used to operating in chaos. It's actually like my specialty. So, in my professional career, I worked in events. I worked from anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people. I worked for Live Nation, Red Bull, all these like high energy, big output companies where it's like every day, sky's the limit of your budget and what you're necessarily going to do. And I think that's when I really saw like, okay, I'm chasing this, what I didn't realize was this adrenaline of feeling important, of feeling needed,
Mm.
of attaching my worthiness to my output, of doing all of these things where actually at the end of the day, it's like, what did I have to show for it and what was mine? And I think for a really, really long time, I've always like admired, not necessarily that, but other companies that I've seen along the way really like stand up and do impactful work. And I was like, why, rather than admiring them, I really just want to be one. Like, I really want to put my money where my mouth
Mm.
is. And like, rather than like in my own little private circle being like the, grief girly who was always there to answer any of the questions, it's like I really wanted to make a difference. And I sort of spoke to this as well too a lot. Is like my mantra for life has always been by Maya Angelou. It's like people will forget what you said or did, but never how you made them feel. And that's
Mm.
really, I think, sort of one of the pushing points is like, I really just wanted people to feel something. I think the final straw, if you will, is I managed a team of 75 remotely and I worked in HR and team culture and development. And during COVID and during a lot of different just waves of the world where I saw a lot of grief happening. And I think sitting in being told how to do something for someone else's vision versus how maybe I would have gone about things or how I really wanted to be able to sit there and hold space for things. I realized like it's never necessarily going to exist in someone else's dream. It has to be in like your vision. And there's a reason that you've been created to be this like vessel that can can create really change for people along the way. So to answer your question, I think it's been like a long time coming, a lot of little like micro moments, but I think the most recent was probably last December when you first met me. And I was having,
Hey.
that spiral little meltdown at our lunch of like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'm someone who has like deep money wounds and financial insecurity issues and come from, very low income family and household. And I'm making this, climbed the ladder, if you will, and felt very financially stable to make this leap of like, if I don't do this, I'll always wonder. Like, I'll always wonder what could have been. And I'm just someone who doesn't want to wonder anymore. So, yeah, that would
Oh
be
my
my
God.
moment.
I love it. And I remember seeing you and I was like, I had just done something very similar and
Yes.
changing jobs. And I was like, come on in, girl. I was you a year ago. Like, you're
Yes.
in the right place.
Yes. Totally. And when you said that, because you like for everyone listening, like you genuinely said that to me. And it really stuck with me where I was like, the fact that not only you said, like, I understand, I've totally been that, where you're like, come on in. It felt like such an invitation of feeling very welcomed by someone who had been there versus just like, this what could have turned into like a vent grief session about like all the things that we've been through. It's just a very like warm welcome. And so I still carry that with me of like, okay, there's people who have done this that like I can look at and see that they're my proof that it will work out all as it's intended to. And not only to like surrender, because I sort of speak on surrender can be a little bit abstract for me. It's like instead, it's like I'm going to trust that this is going to work out in the ways that it's intended to. So
Oh, well, you're on the right podcast, the Trust Your Gut podcast. We're right here. We're trusting ourselves.
exactly.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. One of the
exactly.
things that I think is really powerful, and I think this is a general misconception, and I think just delineating this will be really, really important for the listeners, is that, even today we spoke a lot about like grief and loss, equating that to passing, the death of someone. But I think one of the
Totally.
things that you do in your business that's so beautifully done and so important is talking about how grief permeates nearly every facet of our lives. No one gets to miss out
Yeah.
on this because it can be a loss of income. It can be a loss of a version of yourself while you're healing. It can be a loss of an animal, like whatever it is. We've all experienced some adaptation of that. And so I was wondering if you could speak about, even hearing your story, like there's these iterations of you that have come about to be the woman that you are today. So speaking to
Mhm.
how you kind of have this umbrella term of grief, but really allowing it to envelop all these different facets of how we experience that throughout our lives.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that because I feel like, the story of my family is what sort of encourages people to get to know Sunday mornings because it has some validity, if you will, and like some backing of like, okay, this isn't just this woman with this idea. It's someone who really understands what people are needing. But I think for me, like an equation that I really try to like mirror back to people if that has helped is that change equals loss equals grief. It's like any change that you're experiencing is a form of grief. And I think we're so quick to compare. It's just like human nature to be like, oh, well, she lost her whole family. That doesn't even compare to me losing this. Like I don't even want to own it. I don't want to claim it. I don't want to say that that's what it is, but it is. And I think the longer that we don't own it and talk about it, the longer that we're still dismissing what it is. And I think things can feel like anxiety when it's actually grief. Things can feel like a lot of different emotions when what you're experiencing is grief. And so there are so many things. I mean, that could be a whole nother episode. And I know you feel very similar to me on this. So I feel comfortable speaking for both of us. Is it is so many of those things. If it's like the rebirth of yourself, it's moving, it's change of jobs, it's change of health. I mean, look, the world collective grief that's happening right now. There's so many examples of that. But again, we want to be quick to compare, or I think back to myself honestly, when I was in school, and I went to school for counseling with an emphasis in substance abuse, and it was the first time I ever really learned about even PTSD, which I think is also another thing that really goes sometimes hand in hand with grief. And I was someone who was learning it, and I still wouldn't claim that I had it. It's like, oh, no, no, that's for heroes. That's for people who have gone through things. That's for anybody else but me, right? How dare I call myself out and give myself that credit that losing a family member every 2 years probably is going to amount to PTSD. And so, yeah, I think there's so many things of just even like, to your point, the general knowledge of that it is not just loss of a loved one. Of course, that's included within it, but it's so, so, so much more than that. And I think one message that you sort of alluded to that I share a lot with Sunday mornings and in my work is it is the only thing that is inevitable. Like change is inevitable. So let's like bring back even a layer of like, if you're still someone who's like, I'm not convinced, it's like change is inevitable. Grief is inevitable. It's like you can't even necessarily promise love, but you can promise a form of loss. And so I tell people, like, yeah, we're still avoiding talking about it and making it be this sort of like hushed topic to the side of, well, I don't want to see someone be upset. So how is this inconveniencing me? How is this making me uncomfortable? If seeing my friend this time and I bring it up, that they may, it may activate something within them versus we could just have this like easy peasy, nice like dinner night together where we just talk about like surface level things.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That is so powerful. And I think like even reflecting on my own experience of like this healing journey that I've been on for the last few years. I mean, one of the not only grieving the different versions of myself that got me here, but the relationships that have been lost in the process. If somebody would have told me at the beginning of
Mhm.
this how many people were no longer going to be
Mhm.
in my life, and like grieving people who are still alive, I think like I had a very rudimentary perspective of grief. I was like, well, if they're not walking on this planet, that triggers the grief. But I really appreciate your reframe on that of being like, no, any kind of change or shift is going to trigger that same grief response and honoring that as you would as someone passing.
Mhm. That part, because I think, I could go into like a whole dissect of this, but to keep it brief, I think one memory that really comes to mind is one of my very best friends recently went through a breakup. And it was a very mutual agreement that it just wasn't working out anymore. And I think breakups are such a beautiful example of how we love to just quickly dismiss and or route to anger, or you're better off, you're going to find someone better anyways. And I was sort of just sitting with her and we're having this conversation where it was like anger was what was coming up, and not in a way to dismiss it, but I think it was because sadness felt so much harder to feel of this
Yeah.
person still living and their life is going to exist on without me. And we
Right.
mutually agreed as a romantic partners we're no longer a match, but there actually isn't any hate in my heart. No one did anything wrong, we just aren't working. And so when chatting with her, it was like, I understand that it's so much easier to feel anger than it is to feel sad about this. And I welcome both. I welcome anything that's actually how you're feeling, but just encourage you to take a step inside to like realize and think about if that's actually how you're feeling or if that's how others around you are encouraging you to feel. Because that's like even sort of like gathering in anger and like vent sessions is like a lot easier than being like, you know what, you were together for 6 years, you did live together, you had pets together, you had all these things. And that is really, really hard that the love isn't there anymore. And the love is still there, but to love someone and to be in love with someone are two very different things. And it's okay to understand that we can still like love and value and appreciate the time spent together. Friendship breakups, romantic breakups, I think are something that are wildly important to understand. It is grief, even if it's ended in, good terms or mutual agreement. I think it's very, very big. And it sometimes can be really hard to own the pain that comes with losing someone that is still living because they're still existing and you're maybe still seeing them on social media. It's, with a past loved one. And for me personally, I can almost turn it off. It can be out of sight, out of mind a little bit if or when I need it to be, versus then seeing this person out or, mutual friends or any of the other scenarios that could be there too. So
I'm sensing another podcast episode about grieving people who are still alive.
Yeah, it is. It's complicated. And I think that's another thing that we shy away from feelings that are a mix of a lot of different feelings. And for myself included, I appreciate that you bring that up because I lost a lot of friends in my life. One, because I can fully own and claim I didn't know how to have friendships. I was scared of
Yeah.
relationships, period. Because to me, relationships mean you love someone and then they die. It's like all I'd seen modeled, or they go away. I had huge abandonment issues of like, okay, I'll just sort of slightly show up and coast and be there versus like have the tough conversations that come up, but no, we still love each other. Have those like real deep adult friendships that I still was even learning how to like mother myself in relationships and be there for myself of like what do I want in relationships, what is it, what are we both getting, are we leaving and feeling better after we've like experienced this time together. So yeah, I'm so with you. It is so unspoken about, and I think it is something that like I feel very very passionate about, of having people give themselves the space that they need within friendships or romantic breakups.
Oh, yeah, I feel like we could riff on that for like an hour. So more to
Yeah.
come. More to come there.
Yeah.
But I
Exactly,
appreciate you sharing your
exactly.
perspective because I think a lot of people can really plug into that and are seeking a better understanding of how to give themselves permission to feel and navigate those relationships as they kind of part. There's so much potency there. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you about was, it sounds like you have been a resource for a lot of people, even personally, and now branching into your business professionally, and how to navigate their grief. So, it kind of reflecting on these years that have passed, what do you think is probably the number one question you get around someone
Mm,
either grieving or someone trying to support someone they care about as they grieve?
Great question. I think for someone who is grieving, most common is, will it hurt this bad forever? Like, I just don't get it. Like, I see that you sort of have this spark of joy. I see that you have this light, but I think you're just special. Like, I don't think I'll be able to get there myself. And I think, I mean, that I could go into a whole thing, but to keep it short and sweet, I think it's that feeling again of trusting that like I am or they are going to be able to make it out of this. And I have been there where I didn't believe that I would. And so that's why,
Mm.
especially when receiving that question, I don't sort of take it lightly. I don't sort of, again, fill it with platitudes. It's like I really try to take that moment of them understanding it's unique to each person. And sometimes it's just hard. And we have to own that it's just hard. And it might be hard for a really long time, but it's learning how to like come back into yourself. That also is one of the most like beautiful lessons. I think that grief can be such a beautiful teacher. And I'm not someone who just is like trying to see the, rainbow sparkly side of everything. I just think when I've actually gotten out of that like survival mode, the logistics, selling the houses, selling the items, it's like you're from a place of operation versus reflection. And so I think that's also when it feels so heavy and so daunting, is when you're also having to do tasks when you don't even have like two brain cells and you feel in your brain of that too. And again, I'm speaking more so to like physical loss, but I think also we can go back to like job loss or friendship or changes and rebirth. Oh my gosh, I've gone through so many versions of myself. Sometimes I'm like, I hope this isn't the final one because I don't know if I really like this version, So I
Yeah.
think there's iterations of that. But and then for myself, of people, or for people wanting to know how to support people, it's they don't know what to say. They don't know how to start the conversation. It's they want to be just enough, but not too much. They don't want to say anything that offends anyone. It's like in that, so like, to be honest, calling it a little bit out is like you're making it about yourself. And just
Mm.
don't. Just try and tell someone like, might be a little awkward. I'm new at this, but like I really want to show up and be able to support you. Can you tell me, you know, I think too, of not leaving it open ended of like what you need this week, but it's like, can you tell me, would it be helpful if we did share some memories about that situation? If you want to talk about, looking for jobs, if you want to talk about how hard it was to leave or how empowering it was to leave, but it's still hard to leave what you knew and what is comfortable regardless. So I think those are like the two most common things I see, which I think really beautifully, if you even look at them, it's the person's asking, like, will always feel this bad. And the other person's like, I want to show up. It's like literally being that bridge of the person wanting to have the comfort and the person not wanting to know how. So again, sort of brings us full circle. It's like what I aim and hope to be with Sunday mornings is that bridge of two people that are just really trying to understand what is happening.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think the education piece is incredibly powerful because I can even think back to friends of mine who lost their parents or, who experienced job loss or layoffs. And I never, like, I felt myself wanting to evade the conversation out of my own discomfort. And so hearing you kind of
Mhm.
like call it out and say, like, you're making this about you and you're really just trying to show up for your friend, for your loved one, for your parent, whatever it may
Totally.
be, kinda holds us accountable and holds us to a higher standard for each other because the reciprocity around this, right? We just talked about how grief affects all of us and it's synonymous with
Mhm.
change. And so we're all going to experience some degree of this and throughout our lives, some more than others. And I think we owe it to each other to be there for each other and not skirt around these topics that create internalized discomfort for us, because then are we really, truly in community then?
Yeah. And I think it's really one thing to touch on that too is I think it's really easy then to go sort of like in a shame spiral of like, oh my gosh, I wasn't a good friend. I didn't know how to show up. I didn't say anything when no one else was saying anything. And I think it's never too late. And that's what I really love to encourage
Mm.
people. I mean, even just yesterday and keeping it sort of a little bit vague out of privacy for the conversation, but someone came up and was like, my friend's mom actually died a few years ago, and I'm realizing, wow, I really didn't understand how, like, what that actually meant. Because losing my mom, this person is speaking, losing my mom just a few months ago, like, it's like I really, really understand what was needed. And it's like, rather than sort of, again, go down that shame spiral, is maybe start to have that conversation. Like, what does it hurt to reach out to the person and say, you know what, I'm really, really reflecting on how I wish I could have shown up a little bit different for you. And I'd love to understand, whether it be asking about death anniversaries or dates that are important to them, or even just grabbing lunch to like really reflect what's on your heart. I don't think it's too late. And I think when we get stuck in shame, we're also doing disservice to ourselves and like our loved ones too. So it's definitely, calling it out. It's like a polite call out of like, own what's ours to own, but also don't sit there and then feel like you can't make any, you're sort of paralyzed from that now of like, well, now I don't know how to show up for anybody. It's like all we're doing, we're all being human for the first time ever. Our parents, our loved ones, like, let's just own it and call it what it is, that we're all just trying our best. So,
Yeah, I heard a few years ago somebody say call it in. And the idea is like you're bringing attention to something, but you're doing it in a welcoming way. And so I think
mhm,
that's what came up for me when you were talking about that, of like holding each other accountable, because at the end of the day, like people are generally well intentioned, especially when they're trying to be at the comfort of someone they care about. And so I think,
mhm,
welcoming that. And I think, and that's why your business is just such an asset to our community, because I think just that education piece, like, again, unless you're trained in some kind of mental health provider or, hospice care, like there's just not a lot of resources out there, like you had mentioned at the beginning of the episode, around how to navigate
mhm.
these really difficult conversations that admittedly impact all of us. And so I was wondering, as we kind of go to close out today, if you could share a little bit about, you discussed about how gift giving is kind of your preferred modality and something that
Mhm,
brings you a lot of joy.
mhm.
And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about the boxes that you are currently curating to, kind of really be able to push out to people, through Sunday mornings.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that. I feel like it's something that I don't necessarily touch on because I just feel so passionate about all of the resourcing and even just giving sort of pieces of education. But also want to clarify is like, I'm also not an expert, right? I mean, even in my own personal relationships, there's times that I also have to reflect upon how I'm showing up for people. And I think, so just encouraging people to know like there never is, in my opinion, an expert, because it is each case is so unique and each version of grief, just as we are humans, is so unique. So just understanding that needs change. And just because even two people experience the same loss doesn't mean they're going to experience it the same way. So I think going back, even to the beginning of our conversation with parents, if, you have multiple children and they're experiencing the same loss, is also just really inviting yourself to be curious in those moments and being really gentle and giving yourself a lot of grace when you're all trying to figure it out together. But about the boxes and sort of leaning into that, I really wanted products that not only were educational, not only mental health focused, but really would help people to go inward. I think, yes, I 100% agree, and obviously champion that grief should be spent in community, but there's a lot of times that it's not. It can be a very isolating experience, and sometimes it needs to. And so within the boxes, there are things that the person can go inward with. So whether it's different books that I found that are super helpful, whether it's ritualistic items from like different body oils or apothecary items, or things that just help you really understand of like, right, that mind body connection of tapping back into what it feels like to even like give yourself a hug or feel your temperature of your hand on your skin, or all these things that maybe don't happen or haven't happened recently. And I think specifically a lot with miscarriage or child loss, it's like learning to love yourself and trust your body again, and the different things for different boxes, of course, but then also going back to anniversaries or grief dates, it's like, what are things that they can do within the boxes that can help them honor that loss during that time, or new, rituals. Again, I keep coming back to that word, but they're things that you're going to carry with you, or that you can carry with you, versus just a meal that is super, super supportive and helpful, but it's a quick fix. It's an in the moment fix, versus something that over time you're sort of teaching yourself to come back to in those times that do feel dark and within the waves of grief. Because myself included, sometimes I have really great days, and sometimes I have the days that it still shows up really, really heavy. And I go back to the tools that we've talked about that have helped me come back to mind body. So when you first open it, my goal is that it feels like a warm hug. It feels like you're feeling seen. It feels like you're having someone that's going to show up. The boxes themselves are so beautifully designed by my dear friend Natalia, who we've worked really hard on this collaboration to have it feel warm, and not in a way that's dismissive, but it's a way that you can really keep the boxes yourself as your little home to come back to your grief. So like I mentioned, you can keep photographs in there, you can keep items maybe that have come up, you can write little notes to yourself to remember. It's just this really safe space that when you want to activate those feelings, you can open it and sort of walk yourself back into that journey that you're experiencing. So yeah, the gifts themselves, I'm aiming to have them be primarily small women-owned businesses, because it's also very, very important to me to give back to the community in that way, and have it be a community effort all through. So yeah, it's a little bit more about the boxes. We're currently crowdfunding for them because, again, I wanted it to be really backed by the community and championed by the community, and already start my mission, really, which is just bringing awareness to grief and how we talk about it, and changing the cultural messaging that we currently have that surrounds it, that I just am calling out that I don't think it's good enough. So
Yeah, wow, how impactful. And I will definitely leave the link for the crowdfunding page in the show notes, so that if you feel called to contribute, we would love, love, love for you to click on that and get to know more about Sunday Mornings and Natalie's mission. And if you feel called to contribute, that would be wonderful. What is the timeline for the boxes? Do you have one?
yeah, so right now so a lot of what the crowdfunding is going to, I'm someone who's very transparent in where my money is going to. And so a lot of that will be in purchasing the actual products themselves. So I think that's one thing that's really beautiful about contributions, is that you're giving back to two small businesses or multiple, and the fact that I'll be purchasing from small businesses the products, and then the production design of those boxes specifically, and then officially building out our website. Sort of a little time contingent on when and of how the funding goes. So that's why I especially am just so, so deeply grateful for everyone's support. Even just, I know sometimes money can be hard or challenging, but you still want to feel included and feel like you're making a difference in that impact, and sharing it is so supportive and helpful too. So every dollar counts, and I'm just so, so grateful that, the community is really responding well to it and understanding the mission and wanting to support it too. So
It's so important, yeah, and, like, again, kinda going back to the beginning of our conversation around how this isn't the sexiest topic to talk about, but you are in fact making it, my dear. So, you're making it warm, you're making it
thank you so
approachable, you're making it
much.
palatable for people, relatable. I mean, there's There's so much depth to this, and I'm just so grateful that we crossed paths on that Saturday morning randomly, because I
I
so
know.
deeply plug into your mission and your vision for this business.
Likewise, yeah, I think everything that you're doing is so important, and I think we've even talked about is like that intuitive nudge, that bringing it back full circle to why I even started this. Is I just felt it was so needed, and it had to be me, and so I just honor and respect so much of the work you're doing of having people understand even how to tap back into that. And I love just flow state as a whole. Flow is like what I aim for in so much of my life, and so I just love the word. I love that it has movements. It has, no pun intended, but it has the ebbs and flows and understands that it can be the duality of both for people. So I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you from the day that we met. And I'm just so excited to see everything that's to come for you also in this time of transition and grief as well, too.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, one last question before I let you go.
Okay.
Um, you mentioned that you carry your mom with you. And one of the things
Mhm.
that with my business is not only the mind body connection, but the mind body spirit connection. And so I'm wondering if you could share, what you're comfortable with, share around maybe how you still continue to feel connected to your mom, especially during these seasons where you are evolving and being in service to something so much bigger than yourself. I think that would be really powerful to kind of hear your own testimony around that and how you feel like, she's with you.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that. I think it's like so much of what I do, I feel like is that connection to her. I recently found Laura Lynn Jackson, who I feel like has been a huge catalyst for me of really calling in very specific signs and sort of communicating. I highly recommend her book, literally called Signs and Synchronicities of the Universe. But that's been very supportive for me of on the days that I really need it, because at the end of the day, I'm still just a young inner child, right? I'm still just someone trying to understand that I'm worthy or enough, or that people are going to resonate with the idea, or that full on that I'm going to get funding to make this dream happen. And so I think it's specifically asking for those signs. And I think, even thinking back to the beautiful event that we had yesterday when I was sharing with everyone, um, literally the song that my mom and I used to always sing to each other came on. So I think it's just all around us. I think, I haven't needed to per se look for it because it's just there. And I think so much of who my mom is and who my mom was is warmth. Like anyone who knew her, that's just, she felt very inviting. She felt very personable. She felt very conversational. And again, let me remind you, I used to be painfully shy. So it's also I think I've learned so much of like communicating with people and building relationships from what I see modeled by her. And so I think all that it is and all that will continue to be is just such a deep honor of her and our relationship, and who I wish she would have been able to see in the process of that. People feel the warmth that byproduct of also being her child, like we collectively are.
How beautiful. The authenticity, the gratitude, the honoring to her is shooting through the screen right now. So I am just
Thank you.
so appreciative of you sharing that. And I know that she is so proud of you, and everything that you have done and everything you will continue to do. That is felt.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And I think for anybody who's like still learning how to do that, because I think that is something that took me longer than I'd realized, because it also felt a little scary. It's like if I'm honoring her, I'm also owning that she's no longer here per se for me. That felt really hard to tangibly process. And so I think it's also learning what's very unique to you. And it started very simply with just having pictures of her, having a picture of her next to my desk, which then turned into asking for these very specific signs. And again, I think that could be a whole nother podcast episode of how I've really learned to call in very specific signs. So there's no doubting that that connection is still there and living and having its own life within that too. So thank you so much for asking the question. I think it's so important that we talk about those things, because I think when you hear it from someone else, it gives you the invitation to start exploring it yourself too.
You read my mind, girl. Well, Natalie Orozco-Moxley, founder and owner of Sunday Mornings, thank you so much for being here today. It was truly an honor and a privilege to have you.
Thank you. It was such an honor. And again, just thank you. Thank you so much for being open to these conversations.